Drought struck the Valley of Mexico in 1450, lasting for 4 years. Aztec records show diseased and starving people. Thousands died. Perhaps the gods needed more. Among the remains of Tlatelolco, site of the Great Market and the second biggest pyramid complex, archaeologists made a horrifying discovery. It dated from the desperate years of drought. On the threshold of a temple, they found the bone remains of around 40 children. The bones were grouped together with precious ritual objects, an offering to the gods. Children's bones from the same period have also been found at the Great Pyramid. It wasn't unusual for the Aztecs to sacrifice young children, but these numbers are exceptional. The victims are thought to have been between 2 and 6 years of age. Scientists are currently analyzing the remains to find out why these children were chosen. By extracting and testing samples of their DNA, the scientists will discover their sex and more about their health. When the terrible years of drought finally ended, the Aztecs built a series of new temples, giving thanks to the gods, so that it would never happen again. On the hill of Texcoco, on the line which joined the mountains with the Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlan, the poet-ruler of the time designed a ritual center dedicated to the god of rain and his consort, the water goddess. Historians had known about this place from the Aztec records, but it was Dick Townsend who first uncovered its significance.
I simply had a kind of premonition that this amazing sort of conical hill was going to be very, very important. And sure enough, upon coming up the trail and seeing that great tank of water and realizing that streams of water were flowing in here, I thought, this is a sacred mountain.
Sculpting the landscape, the Aztecs created a beautiful ideal model intended to bring rain to the real world. Water channeled from the mountains through an aqueduct flowed around the hill, filling baths and basins at shrines along the way. Walkways followed the channels, paths for ritual processions by priests and rulers. This paradise garden of flowing water is an extraordinary testimony to the skills and beliefs of its architects. Above this shrine, a temple celebrates the poet-ruler who conceived this place. Higher still, a temple honors the rain god. Corn or maize goddesses were cut into the rock to ensure the fertility of the land. The terraces below were once covered with plants and trees, some brought from the farthest ends of the empire. The Aztecs had a remarkable knowledge of horticulture, experimenting in these gardens with species new to the Valley of Mexico. They were also renowned herbalists and healers. But all their healing wisdom and all their offerings to the gods would be powerless against the disaster which was to come. Over a year before the Spaniards arrived in 1519, according to Aztec records, a series of omens warned of impending catastrophe. The temple of the warrior god of the sun suddenly burst into flames. Comets and lightning followed, and the ruler of the time, Moctezuma, had a vision. People coming as conquerors and riding on deer.
Marco Polo had been to China, Vasco da Gama had discovered the route through the Cape, the continent was in ferment, in movement, whereas the Mexican world was extremely closed in. It was absolutely hermetically closed, so that the arrival of the Spaniards must have been like the arrival of people from Mars to us would be today. Totally unsuspected aliens, totally unsuspected aliens. The shock must have been profound, and I think it's one of the reasons that explains the downfall of the Aztec Empire. In a sense, I think the Aztec Empire died of astonishment more than of anything else.
By extraordinary coincidence, the 500 conquistadors led by Hernán Cortés arrived during the exact year when an Aztec prophecy foretold the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god.
Feathered serpents represent not only the precious powers of the earth, but also the flowers of the earth. The ability of the earth to be reborn in a kind of optimistic cycle that was very important to Aztec life. The symbol of Quetzalcoatl also, he was a myth of eternal return, that he would return periodically in the form of a ruler, in the form of a great priest or a great man. He's a symbol who's there in the beginning of history, at the center of history as a great creator god, and then at the end of their history as someone who returns at first to save them, but then in the face of Spanish arms and disease is not able to allow Aztec life to go on.
The prophecy suggested that the returning Quetzalcoatl would be fair-skinned and bring peace and justice. Could this be why the Spanish soldiers were welcomed so warmly? Their leader, Hernán Cortés, described his impressions in letters to Charles V, King of Spain.
I cannot describe 1/100th part of all the things which could be mentioned. I will say only that these people live almost like those in Spain, and in as much harmony and order as there. And considering that they're barbarous and so far from the knowledge of God and cut off from all civilized nations, it is truly remarkable to see what they have achieved in all things.
But there was another reason why the arrival of the Spaniards was so fortuitous. Over the previous 3 decades, Aztec demands for tribute had sparked growing unrest among the tribes they had conquered. The incidence of sacrifice increased dramatically. The worst occasion in 1487 when, records claim, 80,000 people were killed. A bloody example to deter further unrest. The Spaniards had come not just to conquer lands for their king, but to make money for themselves. Joining forces with the Aztecs' tribal enemies gave Hernán Cortés the opportunity he was looking for.
So when the whole conquest was carried out, Cortés takes credit for it. Cortés is constantly talking about what he and his men are doing, but we're still talking about a few hundreds of Spaniards backed up by hundreds of thousands of Indian allies. So the conquest of the Aztecs is not a Spanish conquest of the Aztecs and their empire, but an Indian conquest.
With crossbows and guns, the Spaniards were able to open up the Aztec lines, enabling their Indian allies to carry on the battle with their traditional weapons. But where the Aztecs fought to take live captives for sacrifice, these enemies shot to kill.
The Aztec nation as such disappeared with the conquest. There are a number of poems and chants associated with the downfall of the Aztec world, and one of them says, "Cry, oh cry, for we have lost the Aztec nation."
Throughout the Aztec Empire, the Spanish settlers destroyed pyramids and temples, using the stones to build their own churches. On the site of the Great Pyramid complex, the Spaniards built a cathedral which became the center of their capital, today's Mexico City. In the new empire, Spanish became the dominant language. The Spaniards forced the Indians to work for them, and many were treated with great cruelty.
People often condemned the Aztecs, but when you look at what happened when the Spaniards came, their society has been called a mass sacrifice society or a massacre society, because within 100 years, 90% of the indigenous population in Mexico and in the New World was gone.
The worst killer of all was disease. The settlers brought smallpox, typhus, and other diseases new to the American continent, to which the native population had no resistance.
And the fact remains today that, well, only about 10% of the population is pure Indian cultures. Yet they have managed to survive over nearly 5 centuries is a miracle in itself. That the brutality of the modern Republican regimes throughout Latin America towards the Indian population has been more brutal, more destructive than even that of the original Spanish conquistadors.
But within just 2 generations, a new world was born out of the death of the Aztec Empire, a mixed or mestizo people.
The mestizo world, which appeared very soon after the conquest in Mexico, the birth of a new race, the descendants of Europeans and Indians, which form the majority of Mexicans today, happened very quickly. It was in stark contrast with the English colonization of what is today the United States of North America.
Less than an hour's drive from Mexico City, a group of villages lies on the edge of the valley. The people here still speak Nahuatl, the ancient language of the Aztecs, and it's a crucial part of their identity as modern Mexicans. Every Saturday, the village school opens for extra classes. Nahuatl speakers come to study the roots of their language and the Aztec historical records. Their children learn both Spanish and Nahuatl, one of the most widely used of the 47 Indian languages still spoken in Mexico. The combined legacy of the Aztecs and the conquistadors is visible not just in the small communities who cherish their Aztec past. It emerges most clearly in the religious practices of the majority of modern Mexicans. Their roots date from the conquest, when the Indians recognized familiar concepts in Catholicism.
The symbol of Christianity was a man who had been sacrificed, Jesus Christ. That instead of demanding sacrifice from them, the God of Christianity sacrificed himself. He was on the cross. This brought thousands of Indians into Christianity in enormous belief and faith of the God who had dared turn the tables of their whole concept of the world, and instead of demanding sacrifice of the people, said, I sacrifice myself for you.
This extraordinary merging of cultures and beliefs is the foundation of modern Mexico.
We're moving into a world where the cultures are mixing, communicating and transforming each other in remarkably creative ways. And what you have coming out of the Aztec world and its meeting with Europe is one of the primary examples, it seems to me, of what our understanding of the future is going to be.
Mexico still shares many of the Aztecs' problems. A growing urban population,